Hey, welcome back. So today we're diving into one of the most fascinating minds in all of psychology, Carl Gustav Jung. This guy didn't just study the human mind, he basically tried to decode the entire human soul. And honestly, his ideas are just as relevant today as they were 100 years ago. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's get into it. And hey, if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and there's a lot more stuff like this coming. Carl Jung was born on July 26, 1875, in a small Swiss village called Keswil, right on the shores of Lake Constance. He grew up in a pretty intense household. His father was a pastor, and religion was a constant presence in the home. But even as a kid, Jung was already wrestling with the big questions. Who are we? What's real? What's happening beneath the surface of things? He was a bit of a loner, honestly. He spent a lot of time in his own head, reading, thinking, daydreaming. And looking back, you can see how those early years planted the seeds for everything that came later. He studied medicine at the University of Basel, and by 1900 he had moved to Zurich to work at the Bergholzli Psychiatric Hospital. That's where things really started clicking for him. He was working with patients, watching the patterns in their thoughts and behaviors, and he started to realize there was way more going on under the surface than anyone was talking about. Now, you can't talk about Jung without talking about Sigmund Freud. The two met in Vienna in 1907, and by all accounts, it was an electric first encounter. They apparently talked for 13 straight hours. Freud saw Jung as his intellectual heir, basically the future of psychoanalysis, and for a while it really seemed like that's where things were heading. But here's the thing. Jung had his own ideas, and they were starting to diverge from Freud's. Freud was all about the unconscious being driven by repressed sexual energy. Jung respected that, but he thought it was way too narrow. He believed the unconscious was something much bigger, much richer, and that disagreement eventually led to a split. By 1913, the two had gone their separate ways. It was a pretty painful break for both of them, actually. And this is where Jung's thinking really takes off into its own territory. His most groundbreaking idea, the one that still gets people talking today, is the concept of the collective unconscious. So here's the basic idea. Beneath your personal unconscious, all your memories, your repressed thoughts, your individual stuff, Jung believed there's a deeper layer that we all share as human beings, like across cultures, across centuries, across the entire history of humanity. He called this the collective unconscious. And living inside that shared layer are what he called archetypes, universal patterns and symbols that show up again and again in myths, religions, dreams, and stories from every corner of the world. Things like the hero, the shadow, the anima and animus, the wise old man. These aren't things you learned. According to Jung, they're hardwired into the human psyche. Pretty wild concept when you sit with it. One of Jung's most powerful and honestly most useful ideas is the shadow. Your shadow is basically the part of yourself you don't want to look at. The traits, the impulses, the fears that you've buried or denied. Not because you're a bad person, but because that's just what we do. We hide the parts of ourselves that feel unacceptable. Jung's whole thing was, don't run from your shadow, integrate it. Because the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge don't just disappear. They come out sideways in your relationships, in your reactions, in the things that trigger you hardest. He had this famous line, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That one hits different every time. And if this kind of deep thinking is your thing, seriously, go ahead and subscribe. We go down these rabbit holes all the time. Jung also believed that every human being has a deep drive toward what he called individuation. Basically the process of becoming your most authentic, whole self. Not perfection, but wholeness. Integrating all your contradictions, your light and your shadow, your rational and irrational sides. He saw this as the central task of the second half of life. The first half is about building, career, identity, relationships. The second half is about going inward and asking, who am I really beneath all of that? He developed ideas about personality types too, introversion and extroversion, thinking versus feeling, sensing versus intuiting. If you've ever taken a Myers-Briggs personality test, that whole framework is rooted directly in Jung's work. So yeah, his fingerprints are everywhere. Jung spent decades refining his ideas at his home in Kuznat, a small town on Lake Zurich. In 1923, he also built a stone tower by hand in Bollingen, a place with no electricity, no running water, where he would retreat to think, write, and just be. He called it a place for his soul, which is very on brand for Jung. He traveled extensively to Africa, to New Mexico to meet with Pueblo Native Americans, to India, always searching for common threads in human experience across cultures, and he kept finding them. He wrote enormously. His collected works run to 20 volumes, and toward the end of his life he worked on one of his most accessible books, Men and His Symbols, trying to bring his ideas to a general audience. Carl Jung died on June 6, 1961, in Kuznets, Switzerland. He was 85 years old. Here's the thing about Jung, though. His ideas show up everywhere. In therapy, obviously, but also in literature, in film, in how we talk about personality and identity. The idea of the hero's journey that George Lucas used for Star Wars? Deeply Jungian. The popularity of personality frameworks? Jungian. Even a lot of modern conversations about mental health and self-awareness trace back to concepts he was developing a century ago. He wasn't perfect. Some of his ideas were controversial and his personal life was complicated. But as a thinker, the man was genuinely one of a kind. So that's Carl Jung, the guy who looked into the depths of the human psyche and came back with a map. Whether you fully buy into his theories or not, there's no denying that he asked some of the most important questions a person can ask. Who are you? Really? What's driving you beneath the surface? And what would it mean to truly become yourself? If any of this resonated with you, drop a comment below. I'd love to know which concept hit hardest. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you know the third time is a great moment. Hit the button and you won't miss any of the next ones. Links to everything we mentioned are down in the description. See you in the next one. Take care.